Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the 15th Symposium of Irish Studies in South America, Virtual Encounters. Thank you for joining us in this interview of Mary O'Donnell with Luci Colin. My name is Vítor Alevato do Amaral. I teach at Fluminense Federal University in Rio de Janeiro, and I'm one of the directors of ABEI. It's going to be my pleasure to chair this session this morning. I will start by introducing our guest. Mary O'Donnell is the author of 11 books, both in poetry and fiction, and has also co-edited a book of translations from the Galician. Her titles include the best-selling literary novel, The Light Makers, Virgin and the Boy, and the Elysium Testament, as well as poetry such as The Place of Miracles and Legendary Heroes, and her 2009 critically acclaimed collection, The Ark Builders. She has been a teacher and has worked intermittently in journalism, especially theater criticism. Her essays on contemporary literary issues are widely published. She also presented and scripted 3 series of poetry programs for the national broadcaster RTE Radio, including a successful series on poetry in translation during 2005 and 2006 called Crossing the Lines. Today, she teaches creative writing at the National University of Ireland, Maynooth, and has worked on the faculty of Carlow University, Pittsburgh's Master of Fine Arts program in creative writing, as well as on the faculty of the University of Iowa's summer writing program at Trinity College, Dublin. In 2011, she received the President's Alumni Award at the National University of Ireland, Maynooth. The interviewer, Luci Colin, is a Brazilian poet, fiction writer, translator, and teacher. She has more than 20 books published, among which A Palavra Algo, winner of the prestigious Jabuti Award in 2017. Her translations include Gertrude Stein, E. Cummings, Rachel Lindsay, Gary Snyder, and others. She has undergraduate degrees in music and languages and holds a PhD in literary and linguistic studies from the University of São Paulo. She has completed 2 postdoctoral researches in Irish literatures. She's now retired from the Department of Modern Foreign Languages of the Federal University of Paraná. Welcome, Mary and Luci. Well, this is how it's going to work for us. You will have the time for this conversation, dialogue, interview, as you want to call it. In the end, I will collect some questions from the audience and I will pass them on to you, if time permits, of course. So without any further delay, I give the floor to you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Vítor.
Thank you, Vítor. I sent many questions to Mary. See, if I could, I would ask millions of questions because she is such an accomplished, wonderful poet, writer, and a person, an extraordinary person open to this dialogue. So I thank you, Mary, for all this kindness and all that. And I thank ABEI for this opportunity to have this conversation here with Mary O'Donnell. I would suggest, due to the scarcity of time, that we could, before asking the questions, Mary, we could read a poem. I think that then people will feel a little bit of Mary's poetry. So I would invite Mary to read one of the poems we decided to present here, and then I may read my modest translation of them.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for hosting this interview and for having me here. It's a delight to be in touch with ABEI again. And I'll read, the first poem I'll read, Lucy, is Missing Brazil. And I think that is one of the ones you translated, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, I've also translated Dublin. We may leave this.
Dublin, I have it as well. Well, whichever you like, you know. Missing Brazil, look, I have to declare I only spent 3 weeks in Brazil in 2019 when I was teaching in Sao Paulo University. And so this poem just emerged during this summer, this past summer, because there were so many impressions that had formed in my mind. So for Brazilians, please forgive an outsider's perspective. I'm sure there are things that are not so, but this is just what I picked up. Missing Brazil. I will not head for Brazil again. Fly over those steaming kettle clouds in a plane nosing south of the equator. Passing Rio, over sand-furred blonde beaches. Nor see the cloud-scraping apartments of Sao Paulo, or drive past the politician's high compound. I will not walk through Cracolandia, witness tiny women with thin scarves wrapped around acorn breasts who sell themselves to anyone. People sprawled beneath a canopy of ficus trees as the daytime world rustles, hustles, and they rest with watchful shut eyes. Street corners, cafes, the smolder of thick coffee as I drift, shops where women consider skirt lengths and décolletage, my life a half-ignited flame treated like a casual gift. Fallen fruits from a clown fig tree remind me, dust on streets, couples tucked limb on benches in broad parks, those green-lit awnings overhanging a restaurant where I ate alone during a torrential storm. I photographed the empty chair opposite, sent it home. Not lonely, just alone, and everything richer than before, ablaze in the rain. Now I mourn. Those days are done. I will not drift again beneath steaming kettle clouds, never travel so far again, learn so much, so little.
Saudades do Brasil. Não vou retornar ao Brasil, voar sobre nuvens de vapor de chaleira, em um avião, em bica ao sul do Equador, passando pelo rio, por praias de areias dourada, nem ver os edifícios que arranham nuvens de São Paulo ou passar de carro pelo alto complexo de sedes administrativas. Não vou atravessar a Cracolândia, testemunhar mulherzinhas com finos lenços ao redor dos seios roliços que se vendem a qualquer um. Pessoas esparramadas sob a copa de figueiras, enquanto o mundo diurno se apressa, se agita, e eles descansam com atentos olhos fechados. Nas esquinas, nos cafés, a fumaça lenta de um café denso, enquanto vagueio, lojas onde as mulheres discutem comprimento de saias e decotes, minha vida, uma chama semi-acesa, tratada como um presente casual. Frutos caídos de uma figueira palhaço evocam poeira nas ruas, casais embolados, braços, pernas nos bancos, em parques enormes, as luminárias de luz verde, penduradas em um restaurante onde comi sozinha durante um aguaceiro torrencial. Fotografei a cadeira vazia na minha frente, enviei para casa. Não solitária, apenas só. E tudo mais rico do que antes, em chamas, na chuva. Agora, lamento, esses dias acabaram. Não vou passear novamente sob nuvens de vapor de chaleira. Nunca mais viajar para tão longe. Aprender tanto, tão pouco.
That sounds fabulous in Portuguese.
It's
you know,
a
and
wonderful.
I could sort of follow it. You know, it sounded great. Things do in another language, of course,
I
especially.
think this is the first. I don't know. Is it the first time that you listen to your poems in Brazilian Portuguese?
Yes, it is. Yes,
Oh,
yes, and
okay.
it sounded wonderful to me.
Thank you. So I had these questions, and I think that maybe we will have to cut some of them because see, we have this limitation of time.
Sure.
But the very first one is that I read that in 2014 you posted a self-interview. I just love that, this self-interview with questions you ideally would like to be asked. So following your own suggestions, I will start with one of the most classical questions put to writers. Mary, when have you discovered that you would be a writer? Since your childhood or later? And please, which are the first readings and authors who influenced you?
Okay, well, the thing is, although I began writing when I was a child or very young, of course, that I would be a writer didn't become clear to me until I was in my maybe mid-20s, you know, early to mid-20s, although I was always writing. I suppose I got very nice encouragement in ways from both my parents, who were you know, they were quite into books and that. And when I was 9, I wrote 4 lines that rhymed. Yeah. And my mother suggested I send it to an English publisher, which I did. And I got a really nice reply back from Paul Hamlin, who was a major publisher of children's books in the 1960s, telling me that although he didn't have a little space for it, a niche at the time, that I should keep writing and he would keep me in mind, you know. So I wasn't slapped down. And so I realized this, yes, this is a good thing to do. But, you know, I suppose I read extensively as a child and teenager, and it's without realizing that it's the other side of the writing life. So perhaps without knowing it, I was preparing myself.
I see.
You know, and so you asked about influences. I'm really not sure who influenced me when I was young. My poetry reading appetites were very much formed by the English Romantic poets like Wordsworth, and you know, all those sort of figures were big, and Yeats, and we did a lot of poetry at school when I was growing up, and I always liked it. But I would say Gerald Manley Hopkins, when I was a teenager, influenced me then. And but I've never stuck to just one type of reading or anything. I keep moving along because I'm constantly intrigued by the diversity of life and thinking.
Yeah, this is something we really notice in your poetry. This amazing, this encompassing views and all sorts of experiences, and many times. See, I'm reading, of course, all your books for the project, this translation project. See, but this is the very first thing that called my attention. All this, the variety of interests, and this touching observation of banal things sometimes, but that reach this extra meaning, this transcendent meaning. So this is very moving. So congrats, your poetry is really, really amazing. And I think that Brazilian reading public will be really, really really impressed with the quality of your poetry. So my second question is, you were an accomplished writer of long and short fiction and of poetry as well. How do you deal in practical and in subjective ways with the peculiarities of each of these genres?
You know, when I was younger, it wasn't difficult. I just rolled from one to the other, in the sense that Well, I suppose I've always written poetry. That's a constant in my life. And I even interrupt my fiction writing to still, if a poem needs to be, if I feel it necessary, I will interrupt it. And I found that easier when I was younger. I think now I find it a little more problematic somehow, probably because I have less energy, you know. But this is the book, The Massacre of the Birds, is my 8th collection of poetry, and it will actually be my 17th or 18th book title, not my 11th, as was said. I think that might be an old bio. So I don't know. I've always known that some things were not suited to one genre or the other, or so it seemed to me. And yet, see, when I was younger, probably that pattern became established. I might write poems, and then another day I might feel like writing, but a poem wouldn't come. So I would say, oh, well, I'll try and write a story instead. And that's just the way I worked. And then when it came to writing the first novel, I was 35 when I wrote that. And it was probably partly I always wanted to, but I sort of lacked confidence also. I mean, I might have had intellectual confidence, but I didn't always have confidence about being able to do this or finish the novel properly, you know, or get it ended or do the dialogue. And so these were worries. And then my husband said to me one day, you know, you're not going to live forever. You know, if you want to write a novel, maybe you should think about getting on with it. And I found that enormously helpful, actually, just that sudden warning of my mortality. But as well as that, I had lost a job that I had had at the time. And so I was able to turn trauma to profit. You know, so that's how that worked. But it is a balancing act. And probably I am, you know, I'm someone who, like, the late professor of Anglo-Irish Studies in UCD, Professor Augustine Martin, who was a Yeats specialist, but he once referred to English as the air that I breathe and the water I swim in, or words to that effect. And that's how I feel about the English language. And I think that's why I need to spread myself quite widely in my exploration of it.
I see, Mary. Well, next question is your novel, your first novel, and you just mentioned that, Light Makers, was a bestseller. So taking books as products designed for a market, according to your own experience, are novels to be considered more prestigious than poetry collections? How does that work?
No, yeah, there is an unconscious pyramid view, isn't there, that you have, I think the novel is on the top, isn't that it, in the conventional view, like you must write a novel. But I don't really see it that way at all. Because I think that I think of poetry as the distilled essence of human experience and language and feeling. And it is very precious. It is like an aromatic perfume, and it has healing properties, which you see if you have translated the work of Gary Snyder, for example, and you know his kind of holistic view of the biosphere and all that. That is healing work, you know. So I think that's one of the capacities of poetry. In fiction, I think it's something different. I can't define it as easily. Perhaps because it's like taking a long swing or a stretched rope or something and swinging on it. But fiction to me is much more like, well, certainly the novel. It's like doing a great painting on a wall, a mural, and no matter, it's much more, it's in a way it's physically demanding, mentally demanding, because as you know yourself, in the writing of a novel, there's always trouble brewing in some corner. just when you think you've got something sorted, you realize, oh yes, but what do I do with that character, or how should I sort out that sequence? So there's always something you almost forget, and sometimes do forget. So it is demanding in a different way.
Yeah.
But what I like about the short story form is that is the ambiguity, the possibilities for ambivalence, ambiguity, and also open endings that allow the reader to participate, because it's really good readers are the people who finish all our stories, in my belief.
Yeah. We have a sort of a, here in Brazil, see, of course, we have a very strong tradition regarding poetry, wonderful poets, amazing productions, but we still have sort of a difference, let's say, in terms of the writing. To be a writer, you are supposed to write novels. See, you won't say, I am a writer if you write poetry. If you write poetry, you are a poet, which is something different. So I think that in general, because of the market, the way things are put, I think that novels, at least here in Brazil, they have this, see, they hold this more.
They are, it's the commodification of art,
yes,
really, isn't
yes,
it? You know?
Yeah.
And yeah. But
I think that a novel is much more entertaining for most people than reading poetry, which is possibly a more subjective experience. But see, we have different cultures, and of course, see, we have no room for this discussion. But as a translator, see, this is something that I have to deal with. This, see, to whom I'm going to translate your poems, and what is this? What can survive all that and not being erased? Will the readers here really grasp everything? This is why I'm selecting, and this is a wonderful moment, just reading your poems and selecting the ones that really impact the readers. So all these cultural differences, let's say, they also matter. This is why I asked you that. See?
Yes, they do. And then I mean, I've done some translation from the German. The poems of Ingeborg Bachmann, the Austrian poet.
Who is great.
I really understand it is very difficult to translate on a certain level. It really is. But I think we have to take our chances. Otherwise, the dialogue wouldn't go on. So I'm quite flexible about it. You know, I don't go for, let's say, I try to keep more than the spirit, but there are some things that one can't actually translate.
Yeah.
And so you have to do something with them, though. But it may not be what was originally intended, but you do your best.
Yeah. And just to tell you this, I've translated poems, and I've organized an anthology with Eleni Huilenon's poems, and also another one by Moya Cannon's poems. And they were really well received here. I have many times people write to me and then say, oh, look, what an amazing poetry. And then they quote the poems, they copy, they post the poems. So I think that there is this extra thing that, see, what is this poeticity that survives. So if we manage to bring a little bit of that, this is okay.
It's terrific.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to know that you yourself as a translator, because you know all the difficulties and limitations and so.
Yes.
All right. So Next question is, you graduated in philosophy and also gained a degree in German and an MA in German studies. How does this background contribute to your literary production? Do you see somehow philosophy, which is more reason, and poetry, which is more emotion, as opposites? Which are the other fields of interest to you?
You know, yeah, I've never regretted studying philosophy. It was just a wonderful subject because I took interesting elective courses like the philosophy of time and things like that that really interested me, and the work of Henri Bergson. And so even though, you know, as a student, I wasn't always the most attentive, and you know how it is. But somehow retrospectively, you realize much more soaked in than you realized it did at the time. So I'm not sure. I think it can help. It's a very good mental discipline, you know, and I was doing it with German as my degree subjects. So that worked very well. But then through German, the year I was doing my MA, I discovered the fiction and prose writings of the German-speaking Bulgarian-born writer Elias Canetti.
Oh,
do you know his name? He wrote a novel called Auto da Fe, and then Masse und Macht, Crowds and Power. Yeah, and I have to say, I don't know whether it's that something was planted in me when I was young, but I found his work on, say, the human psyche in that novel, you know, and the whole catatonia, schizophrenia, the self-armoring self. And at the same time, I was reading Wilhelm Reich, the you know, the scientist, and it all sort of tied together for me in a lot of ways, that a great deal of our emotional armoring, of course, does make us sick, psychically sick. I don't mean that it necessarily causes disease, because I don't believe people cause their own diseases, you know, or anything necessarily. But anyway, he was an influence, and he has always remained one, even though, you know, I think he was pretty horrible, actually, you know, most especially to women. But if I separate those strands, I think the writing is wonderful. So yes, I think, does that answer your question?
Your connection to philosophy is in the poems, no doubt.
Yeah, it is really. Like there's a poem in my second collection, Spider Woman's Third Avenue Rhapsody, called Cosmic Soup. And well, that's certainly influenced by Stephen Hawking, the astrophysicist, and his ideas at the time about whether or not the universe was expanding. So, you know, the ideas of science and philosophy do interest me. And also the idea of time. There's a poem, the final poem in the new collection is called The Future Waves a Yellow Hat. And it is influenced by this sense that, I mean, it's not a very original idea or anything like that, but that actually there are no divisions in time, that there's no past, there's no present, there's no future. It is all now. It's just that somehow or other we behave as if we're moving through it in a linear way. But so that poem is about that. It's influenced by that type of idea, though it's a cheerful poem in a way, you know.
And I must add that it's very much Zen Buddhist also. So we are all interconnected, and no time there is this. The present time always. This is what exists, and everything is interconnected. So just the names, labeling, and that's it. And here we are. Mary, you have a considerable experience as a drama critic and as a journalist, also contributing to the Irish Times, the Irish Independent, on all the various literary journals. Ireland has a very strong tradition regarding literary criticism. How is this in Ireland today? Does it lack something, lost something, or it works well?
Gosh, you know, I'm not even sure that I'm qualified to answer that at the moment, because I feel so many different strands cutting across me, even as you started to ask that question. Literary criticism at the moment, what I notice now, you know, and it's because of my age in a way, I realize that every generation has its own hot topics and has its own agendas and engagements. You know, they don't often go beyond one's immediate generation. So yes. I think the standard of literary criticism is actually very high outside of the newspapers and the small reviews, where it seems to me nobody will ever give an honest, considered response to everything. Is in my view, everything is reviewed in a very bland, safe way, where it's clear. I find that sometimes it's clear that you suspect that there is a tension within the reviewer, but they're afraid to say what they actually think. And it's possible to say what you think without diminishing a work. You know, it is possible to discuss it. So I am a bit critical about that from what I observe in some of the literary journals, but not all, because there are some really excellent ones, like The Stinging Fly and the Dublin Review, for example. But I would question that, all right. And I wonder about it. But the essay type criticism, of course, is very different. And the type of work one finds in Irish University Review, you know, it's terrific. It really is. And but I'm not writing a great deal of it at the moment. I used to do more. I haven't had time. I've written on the work of Micheál O'Shiel. He's an Irish poet, and Miklos Radnoti, the Hungarian poet, and different people. And I actually would like to write a bit more criticism again, because I think that there are some very underrated, they are women fiction writers who need a major essay written on their work, and a couple of poets as well, you know, that could do with it.
Yeah, I think that the situation here is not that different, because criticism in newspapers, it's gradually disappearing, let's say, but being substituted by wonderful literary magazines online, and also the academic studies now, they are really democratic. I mean, say, excellent publications, and spreading all that in a very different way. So I think that there is this adaptation to our postmodern times, that we are in different media. This is a different relationship even to criticism. And as you pointed out, we also have the groups now, the separated groups of interest, what we call the tribes. And this is very, very meaningful. See, yes. That we could not imagine that before this technological time, and with the spreading and facilities brought by the internet. So I think that the whole mechanism has changed very much, and we have to adapt ourselves to all this. I think this is really broad and well.
Yeah, I think something that has, you know, that is really to the fore now in Ireland, and I'm pleased really to see it, is that I'm sure it's the same in Brazil, it's the same everywhere. I would say that the buzzword, but it's a valid word, is diversity, yes. Identity, yes. And that I think that it's the one thing that maybe within the arts there have occasionally been accusations of elitism. Well, I have no problem with elitism actually, but I do have a problem if something is not inclusive, or if if someone feels that on account of their gender identity or their whatever, where they come from, their class, if they, oh yes, this isn't for me. So there is a much greater awareness of that. And I think that also in Ireland, we have a new immigrant community whose origins are in other countries, and they're now, many of them are Irish citizens, and they are coming through in the world of drama, in writing as poets. And this is very important. And I think there will be lots more of that, lots more. And I think it's great.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Mary, once you affirmed that, although you would not say things like, I'm proud to be Irish, you are very happy to be Irish. How does nationalism, such a strong element in the whole concept of Irishness, affect you?
Oh dear. Well, yes, I am. You know, I'm Irish, and so, but I don't make a big deal of it. You know, when I go anywhere, you know, I don't play what's called the paddy card. You know, the paddy, the Irish pad. I don't drink pints. So I don't always fit, but. In terms of national identity, I find that the older I have become, the more glad I am that we are gradually shedding our post-colonial armor, you know, which had a very damaging effect, I think, on our society. My grandfather, who was quite an enlightened man, this is on my father's side, he used to sometimes say that the British should never have left us, or we should never have thrown them out. And his reasons being that, of course, after 1922 and after our independence, we were back to, you know, that concept of year zero, where a country dials the clock back and they're saying, we're going to achieve things according to our mechanisms and ideals. But of course, for Ireland, then that meant suddenly censorship of the arts, no contraception, nothing, you know, nothing like this, and very rigid divorce, all that sort of stuff. So, so we had to deal with that I mean, it was there when I was a child. If someone got separated in my town, it was, oh, they're separated, you know.
Yeah.
And homosexuality, one wasn't aware of it really. So it really did impinge very strongly socially on us, and I think it influenced the early writings of my generation as we began to come through in the 70s and 80s, because we were still feeling the sting of that and the oppression, class oppression, female oppression, family oppression, and that's what was being written about. And but now that has given way to something else. And I can see in the writings, say, of someone like, there's a new young writer that I find very interesting called Nisha Dolan. And she wrote a novel called Exciting Times. And it's, you know, it's set in Hong Kong. It's very contemporary, very interesting, clever, but it's a totally different world, which doesn't carry, let's say, guilt where it exists has moved somewhere else. I'm not sure where it is. I mean, I think in the human psyche, there is always an element of guilt, no matter how enlightened the society. But it has moved in Irish society from its old nexus of, say, sexuality, and it is being expressed differently. Wherever guilt lies now, it's not there.
I see. So, next question is, the North American writer Gary Snyder, and I know you're
I'm an admirer. Yeah.
Snyder, yeah. Someone you told me you admire has said that poetry plays an essential role in society, laying the foundation for people's self-understanding and connection to tradition and place. Your poem and legendary heroes connects people, places, lives. How does the notion of place impact you and reverberate in your poetry?
Well, I think that people pass through places, don't we? We pass through places, and quite often the place remains the same, though we vanish. You know, eventually we die or whatever. And that idea influenced the genesis of that poem. I was looking at it was an atlas of South Ulster, which is the area I was born in. It's not the north of Ireland, but it is Ulster. It's in the Republic. And I was looking at this atlas, and it showed all the different place names. And I just began to think of all the people who had labored, who had lived and labored and passed on, you know, in these areas. I think place is very important. It defines us. Whether we have had a good experience of a specific place or not, I think we are defined by it. I think that, say, the place where I grew up in a very nice place in the country outside my hometown of Monaghan, and I mean, to this day, I absolutely love the land there. I have such an affection for it. It's the idea of, as will happen someday, it will have to be sold, you know, when my mother dies or something like that, because we don't live there. But the idea of leaving behind the lovely big trees and their roots and the lovely fields, I find it so sad, actually, you know, to even contemplate that, because this is the place that I passed through as a young person, and it did form me. It informed my feelings about nature and the natural world, and how that how it respond, you know, how we respond to it and it responds to us. So some feelings of consoling oneness, perhaps, is what I found there, you know.
I see. The subject of the Irish language recurs in your work, as for example, in your novel, Where They Lie. How do you see the relationship of young Irish people to the Gaelic past and its tradition? As a writer, do you feel responsible for helping the preservation of this tradition?
Do I feel responsible? Is that what was the last part? Do I feel responsible?
Yeah, if you feel responsible for helping in this preservation.
I guess I don't really feel responsible, but at the same time, I'm very interested in the smaller languages and how they survive. But you know, they are like small plants growing on the side of cliffs. They are endangered all the time by things I mentioned earlier, the commodification of everything.
Yes,
you know.
Yes.
But I think I had. My husband is a fluent Irish language speaker, and it was the language that he taught when he was years, you know, he used to teach it. But it's not the language of our relationship, for example. It just never, because, well, my Irish isn't as fluent. I understand everything, but I don't speak it as easily. So, but when I went to the northwest to Santiago de Compostela in 2006, I think I had a kind of an epiphanic moment when I walked up into the old part of the city, and I suddenly heard this music pouring out of a speaker onto the street, and it was so Celtic sounding that it really moved me. I felt so moved to see this, to feel this. This wonderful music, and I said, yeah, it's true, the connections are there from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, Brittany, down to northwestern Spain, and even further. I mean, it goes down to North Africa, some of those rhythms in the music. Now, in terms of the language, I think that Galicia and Ireland, at least maybe the intellectuals and the poets, we certainly share a kindred spirit, I think. Obviously, the languages are not related at all, but there is a sense that our two languages need to be cared for. They are an endangered species, as much as a Brazilian forest might be.
Yes, yeah. Well, it seems that Vítor wants to say something. I don't know. Is it about the time, Vítor? Would you like to make other questions?
I wish it never stopped. Actually,
I see.
I'm enjoying this so much. I mean, it's
Thank you.
wonderful conversation. As I thought it wouldn't be an interview, but a conversation we would follow, and a delightful one. I have a few questions
Sure.
here. So as we still have about 10 minutes to the end, I have questions from 3 of the attendees, 5 questions from 3 people. So I'm going to use all my power of moderator and choose 3 questions. The question from Gisele Volkov is, what do you think is the impact of poetry in people's lives? You, I think, addressed this question somehow, but maybe you would like to expand on this.
Okay, well, first of all, hello to Gisele, who did translate some of my work some years ago, which I was very happy to have done. Well, yeah, as I said earlier, I think if one is open to poetry, I think it does have a healing effect. I think it is, you know, it's, if you're connected to it or you're not. Sometimes it's hard. It does nothing for some people, but I think it is a healing thing for the psyche. I think, and that comes from the exploration of word and feeling. You're going down to a very deep level that sometimes invites a journey into maybe unconscious material that one wasn't aware about. And to bring this to the surface, perhaps through poetry, is one effect that it may have on people, you know. But you know, Gisele, for many people, it makes no difference, and they would just avoid the poetry shelves, you know, on a commercial level. And so it depends, really, doesn't it? That's probably not a very satisfactory answer. I can be, sometimes I don't expect a great deal because I've seen the level of disinterest that there sometimes is regarding poetry. And in Ireland, most poetry books are probably bought by a small cohort of the public and other writers.
Mary, you said, I don't believe that people cause their own disease. So Carmen Lucia would like to know more about it from you.
Well, yeah, what I meant by that, you know, sometimes when people traditionally speak about how we all have the capacity to armor ourselves emotionally, implicit in that is sometimes the notion that, oh, if you get cancer, for example, you've caused it because you were so armored and not, you know, not balanced or in some way correct. And it's just that I totally disagree with that. I don't think that we cause our own those sort of illnesses. We are all we all face in the world the problem of how to mediate our feelings in a world which is much more interested in our day-to-day order, our cerebral front brain patterns of thinking. And that's just one of the challenges of being human. But I think that we have to accept that. It's more self-acceptance probably is what I'm thinking of, without blame. If one happens to become ill, there's no point beating yourself up about this. I know this because I have an autoimmune condition myself, so I'm well used to all that sort of stuff.
Thank you, Mary. There's another question here from Jessica Grant, talking about critics. I would like to know how Mary, having worked as a critic, reacts when reading what people talk about her own work. Is it easier or harder having had the experience of doing it?
Hi, Jessica. I remember you from last year. I think the the sort of newspaper drama criticism that I did is so long ago now that sometimes when I read my own reviews, I quake, and I've seen one or two very harsh ones, and I'm horrified. You know, I wrote these when I was in, well, it's half a lifetime ago. Anyway, nowadays I'm always I'm quite interested in reviews. I'm not one of the people who says I never read them, you know, but let's put it like this. I've had one or two really stinking bad reviews. Now, by and large, my reviews have been okay. You know, some have been great, some have been okay, and maybe two, which of course I remember, really, really harsh ones. But the thing is, it doesn't stop you writing. You might be a bit annoyed and, you know, curse a bit for a while, but that goes away. Criticism never stopped anyone writing unless you are very, very thin-skinned. And if you're going to be a writer, you don't need to be too thin-skinned.
Well, I have a question myself. You used the word influence. You said you were influenced, for example, by Hopkins. What does it mean to you, this word?
Oh, well, when I was young, I suppose it meant I tried to borrow the rhythms of Hopkins's work. Now, I was 17, remember, these are my first poems, some of my first teenage poems. And I loved what to me was the effervescence of his language. It's kind of imitative, really, you know. And I mean, I found last year, I hadn't read the work of the American poet Charles Simic until last year. And I was just blown away by one of the collection that I bought, you know, and I just thought, oh, that's wonderful. You see, I always say I'm a very suggestible person. I say this to my friends and my husband. Unfortunately, I'm very suggestible. And so I thought, yeah, I'd like to see if I could do something like that. And so I did a few things that they're in the book, in Massacre of the Birds. There's 3 poems in it that are definitely influenced by Charles Simic. And I'm not sure that they work, but he has this deceptively light touch, you know, and I admired that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but quite often influences, it can be imitative, can be just plain admiration.
I guess a word has different meanings for different poets, writers. So I'm always curious about the meaning of this word for different writers. So no, thank you. You did address the question. I have a question concerning the practice of translating, Mary. So it's a question to Luci. Did you exchange emails? Did you talk on the phone, WhatsApp, whatever? Did you ask Mary questions about how to translate this or that? Or were you not in contact?
Look, since I am in the very beginning of the project, I'm still in that moment in which I'm selecting the poems and reading as much as I can to really if not understand, because you know you were a wonderful translator and you were a specialist in translation, so you know how much of someone you should know to feel comfortable, because to translate, it's not my reading. It should not be my reading of Mary O'Donnell. It wouldn't work. So what is this more encompassing experience of reading and then to translate that? And besides all those so-called translation problems we know very well, see, we have this Germanic language, and then we have this Latin language. What sort of adaptations? What survives? Is it possible to translate the images the way they are put? The other poem we thought about reading this morning is entitled Dublin, and it starts with something that is very precious, that is this reference to the city and the way it's nicknamed. And it connects the place, the poem, everyone, Mary, the persona in the poem, to this historical past. How to take all that and translate that, Vítor, all the implications of that. So I am dealing with the poems and trying to know them, to feel them, the extension of these problems. And then we have a project. Then we will see which are the combinations of poems, which ones will be selected for this collection to be published next year by a publisher house from Rio de Janeiro, that is Roça Nova. And also the editor is going to be in touch with Mary, who is, Laura Di Pietro, who is really very much connected with all these processes. And I think that we will have this triangle of talks and so on. But up to now, I have to thank Mary because she's so open, so kind, and has sent me material. And just let me know, Mary, if I am abusive, because I'm always she's sending things, and I'm really, really counting on all this dialogue. So I thank you again. And well, Vítor, this is, the expectation is set for the publication next year.
For me, this is, it's a tremendous honor to have your work translated into another language, especially a major world language like Brazilian Portuguese, but also, in a more detached way. I think this is part of our lives and work as writers. It is part of the dialogue to have the, to do these kind of exchanges. So what's not to like, so you can shoot whatever you fire it to me and I'll try and answer it,
Thank you.
And we reached the end of this.
Thank you very much, Vítor.
Beautiful
and
session,
Luci.
Beautiful conversation. Thank you, Mary, so much. Thank you, Luci. It was great sharing this session this morning. Please join us at 11, which means right now, for panel sessions 3 or 4. Then at 3:30, we have an interview with Alan Gilsenan about Eliza Lynch, his film. And at 5:15, we have the closing ceremony. So I hope to see you again this afternoon and early evening. Well, bye. Thank you again.
Bye, and thank you very much.